We are going to put before you the ballot paper, which you have, and which I might try and basically walk through very quickly with you and try to set out the logic that has drawn us to arrive at these questions. The first main question is the question that actually we as a convention have been asked to reflect on. Should citizens resident outside the state have the right to vote in presidential elections? A straightforward issue of principle and a straightforward question. In the event of the convention voting yes to that, it's probably, in a way, it could be argued that the second question is probably redundant because you already have voted in agreement with the principle that citizens outside the state will have the right to vote. But in the event that people were to answer no in regard to the first question, they might wish to make a differentiation and to give, if you like, a right to vote in people of Northern Ireland for reasons of the current constitution and the changes to the constitution which flowed from the Good Friday Agreement. But the net effect of that would be there would be a right to people in Northern Ireland and no right to people outside the country. So that outside the island of Ireland. So that would be, if you like, the logic of the second question. We then move on to the third question, and this is where, because again it was clear yesterday that even if a general principle of a right to vote was exceeded, people may wish to introduce some level of restriction to that. And these are, if you like, different levels of restriction. Whether, if the right to vote outside is granted, should it be all Irish citizens resident outside the island of Ireland, just citizens who've lived in the Republic of Ireland as adults, or citizens who've lived in the Republic of Ireland as adults and who have left for a period of time? So that is another, if you like, and then undecided or no opinion. The issue of time limits was again discussed in some of the papers yesterday and was reflected in some of the floor, and this is, if you like, a range of options that, again, accepting the principle is there, that these are different levels of qualification to that principle. And then the final question is, it's around about more of the mechanics. Should in-person voting in embassies or for Northern Ireland residents, other venues, or through postal electronic votings? That represents our best effort at putting together a ballot paper which we thought reflected the content of the discussion yesterday. But I'd be very surprised if there isn't some opinions from around the convention as to whether our best efforts actually constitutes the best ballot paper. Chris.
Good morning, Chair, and the convention. I just had a couple of questions. Number 3, is it a deliberately exclusive question for Northern Ireland, as in all citizens outside the island of Ireland, which would presumably be citizens in Northern Ireland but physically on the island? And the second one was, if you vote no, and I don't want to give the citizens rights to vote in presidential elections, what about the alternatives? So, no, I don't want them to vote in presidential elections, but yes, I want them to vote in all other elections, or not local, but referendum and all elections.
We're not actually asking that question.
Okay.
Because, you know, I think it's quite clear that it's of a completely different scale of question. I think it would be much wiser for the convention to focus only on presidential elections, the question we've been asked to consider. And if we wish to recommend that the convention comes back to that broader question of whether citizens outside the state should get the right to vote in general elections, that might be an issue to be put on our any other business. But it's not, as far as I would recommend, it's not on our agenda this weekend. Tom?
Thanks, Chairman. Just question 3, the second box. I have difficulty with the words "as adult 18 plus." You could have the situation where a family of, say, 2 adults, 2 children emigrate. At the emigration stage, one child is 18, the other is 17. 5 years down the line, only one of those children has a vote. I can't see the equity, the logic in it. Thank you.
Yeah, we can take out as adults.
But can I just,
David?
Just to clarify, sorry, I don't know if this is working. If we were to take out the one, so in the second box, if we change that to just citizens who have lived in the Republic, but I would suggest that for the third box you leave adults in there, because you don't want a situation where somebody has left the Republic as a 2-year-old, and then if you impose a time limit of 5 or 10 years, they never get to vote. So for the third box, you'd need to leave the words "as adult" into that box.
Okay. Gary?
I have a problem with the first 2 questions because I passionately want to vote yes, number 1, but I have major concerns about voting yes, because that's implications that it means I'm voting yes for number 2. Now, I have major concerns, not because, I think Joanna and Michelle have expressed the views very eloquently, a lot more than I can, but it's not because I don't think people in the North don't deserve a vote and they're any less Irish than I am. In some ways, they're probably more Irish than I am. But I have major concerns for the consequences of us doing that, as it was explained by 2 of the previous speakers. So I think it is unfair that those questions are tied together, because I do passionately want to allow people who, maybe for no fault of their own, had to leave this country and deserve to have some input into this country in terms of voting for the presidential election. Do I want to see the people on the North? Yes, I do, but maybe that's further down the road. I just have major concerns that we could be delving into something here which could be, as we know, is a very delicate situation in the North of Ireland. We all want to see this process continuing and flourishing, and I give great praise to the likes of Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams and David Trimble and Stewart and all the people who put that process very, very delicately together. But I do see it as, if I was looking at this through the eyes of a unionist, I'd say that we are starting to maybe, is this Good Friday Agreement just all about nationalists? For example, could we accommodate the unionists? If I put a question to everybody here and said, would it not be more accommodating if we decided to go back and have a vote on whether we should join the Commonwealth? Maybe then we'd be more attractive to the unionists vote. In this, you get the point I'm trying to make here?
I do, of course, yeah.
So I do have a problem with them 2 questions. I have many friends from the North, and I understand the identity crisis that people in the North go through. But I think we have a major responsibility as citizens of this country not to damage that process. Okay. Now, maybe I shouldn't be as concerned as I am about that, but I am concerned.
Okay,
about
fine. I take your point. Let's take the comments around, and then we'll see how we can respond to them. John.
I believe that the citizens outside the state, outside the 26 county jurisdiction, if we call that the state, a requirement to opt into eligibility, perhaps on a 5-yearly basis. And I think that would resolve a lot of the problems referable to Northern Ireland and to the world at large.
Yeah, okay. Catherine first, and then Deirdre. I don't understand that point. Okay. Sorry, could we get a microphone to Catherine, please? First. Sorry, Deirdre.
Thanks very much, Catherine Murphy. Just a couple of questions about the paper. The number 2 question, it actually came up at our table yesterday, about people in Northern Ireland haven't been resident in the Republic. So clearly that's an issue. If you're going to vote yes for that, then when you come to the questions on question 3, you can't then vote yes to the second and third elements of the next section. Am I right in that? Because that would be the converse of what's intended. And then on question 5, you could vote yes or no to, well, you could vote yes to both sections of that, because at the moment you can actually vote by post as it stands, but you can also vote in person. So it's not necessarily, it's not one or the other, it can be both, I presume.
Okay, all right, thanks, Catherine. Deirdre?
I just have a question in relation to the question 1 and question 2. It's should citizens resident outside the state or Northern Ireland, is it possible to split that, either change it or to split it to say should some citizens? Because at the moment I'd vote no to a general should citizens, but possibly a yes to should some citizens, and then with the caveats under question 3. So I don't know if that, it kind of makes a difference to how you'd vote on it.
Art, do you want to just have a couple of comments here? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the first question is the question that we've been asked, which is the main question: do we want to give voting rights? But as we found out yesterday, I mean, we're dealing with 2 different groups of people here, and the convention, we can take out questions 2 and 3 if you like, and just not want to express a view. But if the convention wants to have the opportunity to express a more nuanced view and say, well, yes, we think citizens in Northern Ireland should have the vote because of the Good Friday Agreement and the current situation in relation to the Constitution, but that emigrants outside the island of Ireland should not have. That's an opportunity for you to express that. That's the only reason that we put in questions 2 and 3, because the feedback from the facilitators yesterday was that it seemed to be that the convention members wanted the opportunity to say yes. And I mean, some people expressed a strong view yesterday that, well, that would create a 2-tier system and it would be unequal. But having said that, I mean, it is the convention who decides what it wants to say in relation to this. And that's the only reason that question 2 and 3 are there. I'd be much happier to see them out. Personally, because it makes it easier for me, we just, for once in our lives, we would actually answer the question that we've been asked. But if you want to express a different view or a more nuanced view, question 2 and 3 allows you to do that, to separate them. Question 2 is about citizens in Northern Ireland, and if you like, question 3 is about citizens in the rest of the world, outside the island of Ireland. That's the only difference between them.
Maureen, sorry, I'm going to have to take people as I saw them. So, Maureen, Mark and Stuart, okay? Sorry, Jerry, you wanted to come in, did you?
Just a very quick point. I would like, with your indulgence, to come back later on to respond to some of the charges that were made, but just to try and deal with our job here. Our job here is to make recommendations to the Houses of the Oireachtas on giving citizens resident outside the state the right to vote in presidential elections at Irish embassies or otherwise. That's, so we have to vote for the principle that we agree with. Now, I'm not an expert in any of the rest of it, how do they do it, where do they do it, and so on and so forth. So I'm just suggesting it might be simpler if we kept it to, I'm not arguing that, I'm just raising it with you.
Yeah.
Because that'll be up to the experts and depending on how people vote here, those charged with finding the way to do it. We have to decide whether it should be done. We don't necessarily need to know how it would be done.
I mean, that certainly is an option to keep the question as simple as possible, then accepting that obviously there's a whole lot of detail about the restrictions or mechanics that would have to be discussed in Parliament. The sense we had yesterday was that, from feedback from the facilitators, that people wanted maybe some extra level of guidance, nuance, that they weren't just prepared to sign a blank check of a principle. That was what we were getting the feedback. Maureen. Sorry, Pat, or Mary, thanks.
Maureen O'Sullivan. My difficulty with just having the one question, and the question is, if we say that we're just having the first one, does that mean we're talking about all citizens who have an Irish passport? And it just came home to me because I had a conversation with somebody who left here at age 26, has lived for another 26 years abroad, still has her Irish passport. Her two sons, who were born abroad, also have Irish passports. They've never lived here, probably will never live here. And I see a distinction between those two. And that's why I just can't go with just question one on its own. I think there is a need for something else. I'm not sure of the wording of it, but I do think there is a need for some type of restriction.
And that was the spirit, if you like, in which we tried to frame some of these questions. We mightn't have got it entirely right. Mark, please. And again, could I encourage people, oh sorry, Fiona first. Could I encourage people to be brief here, because we can't have speeches. We want questions or comments about the questions themselves, okay?
Fiona Wheeldon. Yeah, it was just like the last speaker. I had just a concern about, are we looking at all Irish citizens, which includes descent, so children and grandchildren of Irish-born, or should there be something in Section 3 to refer to just Irish-born citizens? In question 4, we need to look at the consequence of implying a time limit, because with the presidential election, there's not going to be another one for 5 years. And if that's uncontested, it'll be 12 years. So if you put a time limit of 5 years or 10 years on it, that's going to be irrelevant. A time limit might be more relevant if down the line there was some, in any other amendments that say in the Dáil, or if Dáil elections were down the line given to electors overseas, a time limit might be more relevant there. But for a presidential election, I think a time limit is a bit irrelevant. And again, with question 5, I had the query, can we answer yes or no to both questions, or is it an or to one or the other? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just on the technicals, number 3 maybe should be worded as to just citizens who have been born in the Republic of Ireland rather than lived. And then on the reverse side, on number 4, instead of having years, it might be elections we should look at. So instead of saying that you're entitled to vote in a presidential election 5 years, which, given the fact that we have a 7-year presidential term, means we're actually automatically ruling people out in some instances, that we should look at. And a further question, 4A, should be, 1 election, 2 elections, 3 elections, or, all elections to do with the presidential election, if that's the process. And then on the other issue, which is question 2, like what we're looking at here, outside of the main question, which I completely agree with, which, by the way, is the lowest level of participation for any citizens outside the state of any country that gives votes to citizens. What we're looking at here is the lowest thing we could give our citizens outside the states, living outside the state, because they will be allowed.
You said that yesterday a number of times. So
but what I wanted to clarify as well, which was information that was given out yesterday, was that Israel and India actually do allow their citizens outside the state to vote.
No,
I think that's an important point, because you made it earlier. And what we're looking at in question 2 is discrimination. We're discriminating against those in the north by virtue of the fact that they're living in the north. And what we're actually contemplating is giving those outside the state a vote, outside living overseas a vote, and yet those in the north may not be given a vote. Now, I think that message coming from a constitutional convention would be nothing short of appalling.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Did I see any other comments at the back here? Sorry, John firstly, and then Martin. And we're going to have to try and bring this to a conclusion, because we...
I'll be short. John Lardner.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on points Michelle has made and Mark just recently. I see question 2 as being disingenuous to some, and to pick up on Michelle's point, the thousands of people that have emigrated through no choice of their own, we also may be possibly disenfranchising them as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Martin McGuinness, and sorry, maybe Diva Stewart there. Oh no, the mic is beside you, Martin, now, so you can, Mary, thanks.
Well, I have to say, I think I agree with Mark. I think that the questions 2 and 3 are confusing the members of the Constitutional Convention, and I think we need to look at that. But the main point I want to make is this, because I think there has been, to some degree, an overreaction to how people think unionists would deal with such a development. I just want to remind people, whenever we negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, which has transformed politics on this island forever, we did so against the backdrop of forming vital institutions, institutions that the DUP said they would have no part in whatsoever. They were pledged to destroy the Good Friday Agreement. That was their raison d'etre. But we effectively negotiated with the DUP in the talks at St Andrews, and the entry into the institutions in a wholehearted way, which had the DUP effectively working the institutions that we had agreed in 1998. And I was at the heart of those negotiations over a weekend in March 2007 when I sat down for 3 days with Peter Robinson and Stormont Castle and negotiated that the following Monday, Gerry Adams and Ian Paisley would make a statement which would confound the media and confound the world that the DUP and Sinn Féin would go into government together. So those people who are spreading the notion that this development would lead to conflict in the streets, I do think are divorced from the reality of the fundamental change that has happened in the North. Nothing of the sort would occur.
Thanks, Martin. Stuart? Yeah.
Just with regards to questions 1 and 2, can I say that question 1 is really the only question that needs to be asked? Because question 2 is answered if you answer yes or no to question 1. It's as simple as that. Because there are people in Northern Ireland who are legally citizens of the Irish Republic. And why should they be treated any differently? So once you answer question 1, I think you don't need question 2 at all. And question 2, I actually think, is a bit of a sideshow. I mean, there are serious difficulties about Northern Ireland, and we've had that debate. But that has to be taken into consideration in the total round of the right of this convention to come to a view, to make a recommendation with regards to the requirement for a referendum. You have to take into account what you want to do for citizens in America and Australia, and those people who see themselves as those people who are legally citizens and wish to vote in an election who happen to reside in Northern Ireland.
Okay, I think we're faced with a real dilemma here as to we either have our final ballot paper as a very simple question, perhaps the question 1 and with the current question 5, which certainly, means that some people who would otherwise be inclined to vote yes may vote no, because they feel that there's not enough nuance in this question, and they'd want to introduce some level of, if you like, restrictions to the principle of yes. The alternative to that short version, the questions 1 and 5, is perhaps in all its imperfections, the other 3 questions that we've included as well. So that seems to me to be the option that we're faced with, whether to go with a very short version or to go with the session as maybe the way to resolve this is to vote. Do you want a short version or do you want the longer version? The short version is the simple question that we've been asked to answer, which would be the current question 1. And probably as some level of addition to that, it would be the current question 5. So that would be one ballot paper. Or the alternative is that we vote on, if you like, the 5 questions, which gives people an opportunity to express a view as to levels of qualification to the basic principle that they would be voting on. So that's now. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of comments that I saw, but we're going to again have to have a. You take the comments first. Yeah, Ivana first, and then Derek. And then Charlie.
Tom, just addressing directly the dilemma you've identified, with others have identified, and I just see a compromise that's possible, if it's acceptable to people, which is to take out question 2 and to change question 3 to allow people to express the nuance, but in a less directive way, a way that's not so specific. So to change question 3 to read, which of these citizens living outside the state, outside the Republic, and then, and I think that would give people the scope to express nuance in respect of question 1, but it would take out the question specifically about Northern Ireland. So, in other words, question 1 remains, question 2 would be deleted, and question 3 would read, which of these citizens living outside the state should have the right to vote in presidential elections? A, all Irish citizens resident outside the state, and then the others stay the same. We have been asked specifically about the state, that is the Republic. And so, that would be in keeping with question 1, but I think would allow people to express a nuance if they wish, but it also means we're just answering the main question without having a separate question on Northern Ireland, which I can see has been
Just on that point, Ivana, I mean, that would mean that you could put an X in more than one box, though, in question 3, because if you wanted people in Northern Ireland and those outside the island of Ireland, you would have to X 2 of the boxes, and actually, in that case, you might as well leave question 2.
So the first question we're asked is, should citizens, as a general principle, and there's no and question 3, which would become question 2, would simply say, which citizens then? So it enables you still to say all citizens then, if you wish, including those resident all over the island and citizens resident outside the island. Or people could nuance it by saying, or restrict it by saying, just citizens who've lived in the state as adults, or citizens who've lived but who've left for a period.
We take that on board. Derek first.
Derek Keating, and thanks, Chair. I suppose I just have a little concern at this stage because since the convention began, it's been keeping within the spirit of the convention that the ballot paper would reflect issues that emerged, and we didn't just deal with the single issue, as I think Jerry was suggesting, answering the basic question that came from government. So my concern would be that if we decided to revert to just answering the single question, it might change that spirit. And I think the spirit has been very important in that principle in dealing with issues that emerge to give people those different opportunities to express their views. So I have concern on that.
Thanks, Derek. Charlie. Yeah.
Thanks, Charlie Flanagan. Chair, I'm not going to repeat the point I made yesterday regarding territorial claims, but I do think it's important. Could I say, just in the interest of keeping matters simple, if we can, and this is notwithstanding the complexity, I believe the question here is, are we going to accord a voting right to Irish citizens in Melbourne and maybe not do so in a place like Marafeld? And I do think this is an important point that we should reflect on. That's why maybe we've too many questions here. Maybe we shouldn't have question number 2 at all. And with regard to question number 5, I believe we should leave it out for the following reason. In the submission that we received regarding applications from overseas contributions with such places like Afghanistan, Myanmar, places where we don't have any form of embassy at all. So if we're going to require that people vote in person, well then we're plainly discriminating against Irish citizens who may be in Afghanistan as opposed to those who may be in Australia. So let's leave question 5 out, and that can be dealt with in the context of the legislation should this recommendation be accepted by government anyway. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's probably a very helpful suggestion. Who is up there? Is it Stuart or Catherine? Catherine. And we're going to stop soon.
Yeah, just a very brief point. Regardless of whether you vote yes or no to the key question, and for the sake of argument, if you vote no to the key question, but nevertheless expect the convention to vote yes, you should be able to exercise your right and answer the other questions in terms of the practical details.
All right. Okay, what I'm going to suggest is the following. The basic option is, are we going to answer a very simple question or a set of questions which introduce a level of nuance? And we're going to establish that now. All those in favour of the simple question, which is the question of principle contained in number 1. All those in favour of limiting us to putting to the convention voting on this one question, I'd like to see those in favour of that. The alternative will be a more complex set of questions, which that's the other alternative that you can vote on. So all those in favour of the most simple question, the question of principle.
Sorry, can I clarify, is that question only?
Yes, yes. So the two alternatives that we're going to be faced with are the simple question we have been asked to adjudicate on or discuss as a convention, the simple question which is contained in question 1 on the ballot paper as it stands. The alternative that we'll consider voting on is whether we will have, I would say, questions 1 to 4, or some variation of question 1 to 4. Some comments have been made in the. I think Charlie's point at the end there is entirely valid, and let's just scrap question 5 altogether. So, so it's. Well, it's. Yeah, if we can see if there's a majority in favour of voting just on number 1, then we don't worry about other things. If there's a majority in favour of a somewhat more complex thing, we're going to come back to help finalise the other couple of questions that would need to go along with. So all those in favour of number 1 alone, as that's what we vote on. Now we need a teller here.
Nathan and Richard, can you count, please? Nathan, you count, yeah?
Okay, so we don't know. We're going to have now. All those who want a longer version of the ballot paper. Yeah. Are you sure? The outcome of this vote is, and it does show, I mean, the substantial diversity of views. The people who wanted the short paper were 33 votes. The people who wanted the longer version, 38.
So it's question 1 to 4 with a couple of amendments.
So, do we want to amend? I mean, is it valuable to take in Ivana's comment? No.
Because the time limits apply to that. We're going to have to.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Sorry, we're going to proceed now. Perhaps in all its imperfections, we're probably trying to take account of some of the comments that were made in finalising the paper. Ivana, maybe one last word, because you've been trying to be constructive.
Could I formally propose, if we're going with the longer version, that we would delete question 2, which I think is problematic and appears to discriminate against citizens who are living in the north, but amend the other questions to say outside the state. In other words, to allow people to express a nuance in questions currently questions 3 and 4 to change those to read outside the state. I think the problem is that we're making distinctions between outside the island and outside the state. And I think it would be easier if we simply said outside the state in all the questions.
Ivan, if I could just make the point, though, the only problem with your proposal is that you could end up with a situation where, with your revised version of question 3, people might decide to impose a time limit on Northern Ireland citizens.
No, because if they're saying, because if you believe that all citizens resident outside the state, including those in Northern Ireland, are outside of the island altogether, then you tick box 1 in question 3, all citizens resident outside the state. The next question simply says if there should be a time limit. In other words, if the majority favour a time-limited version, then what would that be? But I think that's a different question.
But in the current version of question 3, there's 3 different options available, and the third option is a time limit option.
Yeah, but if you don't agree with time limits, you simply tick all citizens resident outside the state.
If you leave the question wording as it is, then you're simply looking at the people living off the island of Ireland. Do you want to impose any kind of limitations on first generation versus second or third generation, or time limits? And you're not dealing with the Northern Ireland one at all, because you've already decided that in the principal question. So you just have question 1, which is dealing with the principle. Do you agree with it or not? And then, depending on how the convention votes, then you go to this question 3, which is just dealing with the people off the island of Ireland. Do you want to deal with only first generation citizens, first, second or third generation citizens? And if it's just first generation citizens, do you want to impose a time limit? So you're
I think,
just dealing with them.
there is an alternative way, in fact, of leaving question 3 and 4 unchanged and having question 2 simply as all citizens. I think there is a problem where we're saying citizens in Northern Ireland in some specific way, but I think that the nuance from question 1 that people are looking for is, should it be all or some? And so perhaps that should be question 2, that you leave it in, but you change the reference to Northern Ireland. You simply say, should all citizens have a vote, yes or no?
Regina.
Sorry, Tom. Regina Doherty. Tom, can I make a suggestion that we just remove question 2 from the ballot paper with a view to having a separate session on it, because it isn't the same. And I think the mood of the people in the room is that they would like to be able to say yes, but the views that were put forward yesterday, with huge respect, were probably very one-sided. And the concern that the people I'm hearing in the room is that they would like to say yes, but they're concerned about the outcome if they said yes. Would it cause offence? Would it cause... And that the other side of that argument hasn't been put to us. So to remove question 2, not with the view of sending a message to the North that we don't care, but with the view to sending a message that we care so much that it needs much further discussion, and to concentrate on the diaspora, which is what I think the intention of today was.
I mean, I appreciate the spirit in which you've made the comment, Regina, but I think it is quite problematic to accept that. And firstly, we will have the opportunity to specify other topics to deal with later on, but I think maybe we can discuss it in that context. I think could I suggest here, because there is a risk of going around in circles here. Could I suggest, Ivana, I think your idea may have an element here of enabling us to finalise the ballot paper. Could I suggest you and Art go off together and try to come up with something that actually tries to capture some of the nuance that we're endeavouring here to deal with? And it's 11:30. We're half an hour behind schedule. The practical problem is that the ballot paper now has to be finalised and translated into Irish and be back here for you to vote on it in about half an hour's time. So I think we're going to have to stop the conversation at this stage. I'm sorry. Is that okay? I mean, I knew this was going to be a difficult session, that we were going to have. This is a complex issue. And, you know, we did our best to come up with a draft which we thought reflected the conversations yesterday, but clearly, you know, it's been a major difficulty. Could I suggest maybe a brief break now, because I think people just need a cup of coffee, and we'll resume immediately afterwards with Tim O'Connor.